Hello everyone, I will show you how to integrate Clerk and Payload CMS. As you can see, we started with the brand new Next.js app. Then I integrated Clerk using standard basically templates. That's why we can see the sign in button here. And when we log in, we have a user with super admin role, which can basically control all of the functionality and assign roles to other users. Okay, now we can see the clerk's user icon here, and let's navigate to the admin instance in the payload. As you can see, payload is also integrated with clerk by starting with the profile. On the profile, we use clerk user ID displayed, but you can override this page, and it is only read-only. You cannot modify the user ID of clerk. Then going back, I have created a custom users page, which is basically querying clerk API and looking for any strings matching the users. As you can see, I have typed my name, and we are present with all of the users matching the email. And we have currently 3 roles: super admin, admin, and editor. The idea of super admin role is basically to access the clerk users and to assign roles. So if I navigate to clerk on the dashboard, in users, all of these users basically are matching the users here, and obviously we can assign and revoke permissions. You will see in the video in more detail about how this is implemented, but the main idea is that, for example, the user 1, which I'm using through the video, has all of the roles, and we're using the public metadata, which is in here. And basically we can control the public metadata of the roles via this page. And obviously the users are integrated with the rest of the functionality. For example, the posts. We can create posts, and we have created by. Unfortunately, we displayed the clerk ID here, but you can search for the user by navigating here and understanding who is the actual user. You can obviously add more to the integration, but I tried to make it simple. And the UI is not the best, as you can see in my custom page, but you can change it the way you like. Also, there is a custom logout component which actually logs out from clerk. As you can see, I'm logged out, and then we can log in back again. And as you can see, this is pretty standard setup. Let's start by going to the middleware. Basically, this is a clerk middleware where we check for the user ID when the user is not authenticated, and when it is querying a protected route which requires authentication, which includes the Payload CMS or any other page, then we direct to sign in. The main idea is that clerk is responsible for authentication only, and then we delegate the authorization, basically the roles checks, to the Payload CMS. So that's why the clerk middleware is checking the Payload CMS and the website kind of routes which requires authentication. For example, the profile page here. It requires the user to be basically we're displaying the user, but we need the session logged in user. So after the user is authenticated, what we do is we manage the access via the user's collection, and as you can see, we have access properties. This is described in detail later in the video, but the main idea is that we check for the roles, for example, who can access the admin dashboard is all of the roles here, and we have check role as a function created. So I followed the clerk documentation for that. In docs, we have SDK references, then Next.js, role-based access control. This is very well described in here. So that's the article I followed. I just changed also so that we have multiple roles per user, also a few other customizations. Let's go back to the users collection. That's about the access. And also we're using custom clerk strategy to authenticate. This is from the Payload CMS documentation in docs. When we have basically authentication section, custom strategies. So I followed this pattern here and implemented a custom clerk strategy. So let me go through that quickly, but again, in the video, you will see everything in more detail. What we do here is we define a clerk auth strategy with the name and authenticate function, which basically checks for the user if it is authenticated, and then it queries the user, tries to find it in the user's collection and then returns it. If not, it creates the user in the user's collection. So let me go back to the get user, and then basically it is returned. This way the user is authenticated. The get user function, again, what we do is we use auth and check if the user is authenticated. If not, we return null. Then when it is authenticated, we basically create current user variable here, which is used to search for the current users, basically in the users collection, and if it is matched, then we assign to the user. If it's not matched, then what we do is we create the user and assign the current user. So basically that's the custom strategy here. And then again, we have minimalistic clerk user ID field only in this collection. In terms of minimalistic, we don't save anything else apart from the clerk user ID. This is how we integrate with clerk, and all of the data for the user, like first name, last name, emails, are basically assigned in the clerk instance. And also the roles, as mentioned, they're assigned in the public metadata. So enjoy the video. Let's start by creating a brand new Next app. I'm going to use create Next app for that. Let's call it Payload Clerk example. Let's use the default options. And let's use the source directory for the payload integration. So I'm going to say yes on that as well. The rest are the defaults. And the depends are being installed. So we're going to add prettier as well to format our source code. Okay, let's navigate to Payload Clerk example. Let's go to prettier website, install prettier, and copy the dependency which we need to install. Let's go back and check the Next.js documentation. Inside API reference, we have configuration, we have ESLint with prettier section. We need to install ESLint config prettier so that prettier and ESLint works together. So I'm going to add this dependency as well. Okay, let's try to run our application with npm run dev. Going to the localhost. Okay, no, it works fine. Let's open this application inside IDE. I'm going to use WebStorm. You can use whatever you prefer. Open here. I'm going to configure WebStorm to use Prettier quickly. So opening settings dialog, searching for Prettier and enabling automatic Prettier configuration. As you can see, WebStorm creates .idea folder and files. This is specific to the IDE, so we want to ignore these ones. So I'm going to modify git ignore for that and add a new section, JetBrains, which is the company, and then ignore the whole folder. Okay. Let's try and format the project using Prettier. To do that, let's go back to Prettier documentation. And as you can see, to do that via the CLI, we can use npx Prettier write for on the current folder. And also we have check command, which is usually used by CI environments to fail if some of the files needs to be formatted. So I'm going to add those two as scripts in package.json. Let's create format script and copy the npx Prettier write command here. And let's add one for the CI as well, in case you want to create a CI environment. But this is out of the scope of this example. Okay. Now let's run quickly the format script. And check what files were changed. As you can see, nothing was changed actually, because the project is already formatted. So I'm going to commit those changes. And actually we want to amend the commit made by the Next.js create next app. So I'm going to use conventional commits and call it feature initial commit Next.js basic setup. Let's call it Next.js app basic setup. Cool. So let's commit and push these ones to GitHub repository. I already created one which you can use. So it is called Payload Clerk example. I'm going to add the remote first. The wrong terminal. Okay. And we already created the main branch, so I'm just going to push the main branch. Let's refresh this one. Okay, cool. We now have the commit in place, and that's it for this part. Thank you. The next step is to do a basic clerk integration. First, you need to register and log in. Once you're logged in, we need to go to the dashboard and create the application. Let's call it My Application. And as sign-in options, let's use email only for simplicity, but you can enable the rest later. Let's create the application. As you can see, you're presented with a guide to follow. We can install the dependency first, which will be used for clerk interaction. And let's save exactly the version. Okay, let's go to the next steps. We need to create environment variables which will be used by clerk. So I'm going to create env local file in the root of the project and copy. I'm going to revoke this application later, so don't worry about the keys. I'm also going to create env example file so you can use it and copy it into env or env local file. I will modify the readme instructions later. So I'm going to delete the contents. so you have only the variables to fill in later. Okay, let's go and create the middleware file, which needs to be located in the source directory, and copy the example from here. So this middleware will be activated if those roots are matched. Basically, we have two of regular expressions here, and the clerk middleware is standard definition, which we'll modify in a bit. Let's go and add the UI components. So for this, we need to modify the layout of the application. Navigating here. So first we need to add the clerk provider, which will inject the user in the context. So I'm going to import the dependency. And as you can see, there are a few more components. Let's add them after the body. I'm keeping it simple, so there is no styling here. So I'm going to import those dependencies as well. Components, apologies. Okay, so the signed out component will display its children when the user is signed out or logged out, and signed in is vice versa. It will display its children when the user is logged in. So let's follow the next steps, and the next steps are actually to run the application. Let's run it and see. Let's navigate to localhost. Okay, as we can see, we have sign in, which is this component. So I'm going to quickly test that. Yeah, as you can see, it is switched. This is because the user is not logged in. And what we can do is actually continue on the next documentation. And let's modify the middleware to be more flexible. To do that, let's go back to home on getting started guide, full stack, Next.js. And this is the article which we followed. So let's double check if everything is followed. Okay. And we have next steps to protect roots using Clerk middleware. Let's modify the middleware a bit so it is more flexible. We will define the roots to protect. So I'm going to copy this constant and paste it. So let me import create root matcher, and here we will define the roots which needs to be protected behind authentication. So I'm going to add the payload root, which will be admin, and we can also have roots on the website which needs to be protected behind authentication. So let's create profile root, which will display the user information later if you want to customize the clerk components. So we have the admin root for the payload, and any other roots which you want to add, you can add it here. This will be the profile. And straight away, let's create the profile page. So I'm going to create profile. And create the function. And return straight away maybe h1 and call it profile. just for testing. I'm going to format the file here. Okay, let's go back to the documentation and let's check how to protect the roots. So we have two options. We can use Auth protect function, which will redirect the user automatically to sign in if it needs to be logged in, or we can use the more flexible way, and here we actually do the check if it is protected or not, and if it's not, if the user is not logged in or it is actually failing, and then we need to redirect to sign in. So let me copy this middleware, actually only the content of this one, with the sync function. And basically this way we will have more control. I'm going to remove this comment and format again. Okay, cool. So let's test this out quickly manually. If I navigate back to the localhost, we need to sign in first. Actually, let's try the profile root. As you can see, we're redirected to sign in. This is because this one is actually activated and returns the redirect to sign in, which you can define in Clerk application. So let's sign up first because we need the user to test with. So I'm going to use my email, and after my username I'm going to do plus and whatever string you will like. This is so that you can reuse the same email with various email addresses. Basically the plus and whatever string you like, it will go to my email, and we can create multiple users to test with like this. So I'm going to use user1 as a regular user role user. So let's do the registration, and I'm going not to save that, and I'm going to check the email on my phone and quickly enter the code. Okay, as you can see, I'm redirected to the profile page and it works fine. So that was the basic integration. As you can see, we have other options to protect roots, but those are out of the scope for now. And what we can do also is to protect all roots by default and define the public ones, but because we're going to use this Clerk example mainly for a website, majority of the roots are public except the payload and few other authenticated ones like profile or some dashboards. We're going to stick with this approach. So I'm going to close that and let's commit this. So this is still feature. Initial commit, let's call it Clerk. Basic setup. Commit this one. Double checking the files, the page we created, the layout. Let me enhance it a bit. Okay, we have the imports and the components, the middleware, the env example which you're going to copy and into .env for .env all local, and the dependencies. Before I commit, let me quickly format the project. Let's use our npm run format command. Okay, we can add git hooks later to do that automatically. So initial commit, Clerk, basic setup. Let's commit this one. and push. That was it for this part. Thank you. As a next step, let's do a basic payload integration. I'm on the payload website and I'm going to navigate to the docs. Inside the docs, we have installation section, and let's use create payload tab for that. So I'm going to copy this command. It is similar to create next tab. Now I'm in the project and let's execute this command in the terminal. So we want to install payload in this project, so I'm going to say yes. And let's see, there is some error here. The reason for this error is that we need to move all of the existing app files into a separate directory. As payload is suggesting, let's call it app. So I'm going to copy this one and navigate to source, app, and create this directory. And let's move all of the existing files into this directory. Okay, the indexes are not ready. So let's try again. Okay, now it's refactored. And let's try to execute it once again. Once moved, rerun the create payload tab command again. So I'm going to maximize the window and rerun it again. So install payload, yes. Let's choose as a database SQLite and go with the defaults. Later we can migrate to Postgres or some other database. So let's wait for the dependencies to be installed. Okay, now the dependencies are installed and we have some documentation links, etc. But let's go and see what's going on with the project. As you can see, there are several changes applied to our project. So let's go one by one. First thing is that we have now env files created with .env and .env example. We were using env local and env example, those two. So let's move the contents into those two. First thing is, let's go and see the env example. This is an example variables. So let's move this to our env example in here. And let's create payload section. Let's delete the contents of the environment variable so you can fill it in later. And let's create also clerk section here as well. Now this, we don't need this anymore, so I'm going to delete this one. And we were using env local, so let's do straight away clerk section here and payload. Let's go and migrate the contents of this .env file into these variables. They're the same, so I'm going to paste this one here. Again, the keys and the project will be revoked, so don't worry about those. So I'm going to delete the .env file. Okay. Now everything is set in terms of .env files. Let's go and check what's going on in the app folder. As you can see, those are the files which we moved, so they're not modified, but payload created the payload CMS files as well as separate root and collections folder. So we will leave all of the files as it is and we will modify them later. There are some other modifications as next config with payload and a few others, like the TypeScript configuration to recognize payload config and a few other bits. So I'm going to format the project and I'm going to run the project. And let's see. First thing is, if you remember, we said that admin should be protected. And also now admin is used by Payload as a root. So let's check out this page. So I'm going to navigate to localhost. Okay. And from before the user is already logged in, you can log in with your user again if you prefer. And let's navigate to the payload section. As you can see, it is taking a bit of time. This is because the whole project is being compiled, the Payload CMS. So let's wait. Okay. Now, as you can see, we're presented with create first user screen to register our first user. We don't want to do that because we have Clerk integration to do that. So later we will modify users collection and few other bits to integrate actually with Clerk and not need to create our first user. For now, let's commit these files so that we have this integration as a basic setup. One more thing is that we have this file used by SQLite, so I'm going to ignore it. And this is part of the payload files, so let's ignore the DB files. Again, we will migrate to Postgres later. So let's see our changes. Okay, let's do git add here and commit this. So it will be initial commit payload basic setup. As we can see, we moved the files from the app folder, so that's those changes, and payload created various files as well as the root, my root example, collections which we will modify, some payload config, the types, and we added git ignore. We also modified env example to add those environment variables, and the rest are modified with payload again. So far we did a basic setup of Next.js, Clerk and Payload, and as the next steps we will be doing authentication and authorization. It will cover a custom Clerk strategy to handle authentication in Payload, and as well as we will be implementing role-based access control with user metadata using Clerk. Going back to the application, I'm logged in as a user, and if I navigate to admin, we are present with create first user page. This is because Payload is using the default users collection and the default strategy to authenticate, and we want to integrate Clerk for that. So to do that, we can use a custom authentication strategy. So let's go to Payload documentation, docs, authentication, and then there is a custom strategies. This method can be used to implement a custom authentication logic, so you can have a look in mod.test, but let's go and copy the code from here, which is the example for the users collection. So it is a users collection, so I just copied the whole code, and let's go and override it and see. As you can see before, this was the definition, and we're using Auth true, which is basically supplying the default logic. So I'm going to override that, and let's see. So we have Slack users, and later we will add admin part to modify the admin features. But the next property is out, and the important bit here is disable local strategy equals true, which actually overrides the default behavior. The next one is strategies array and the whole strategy defined in this object. After that we have fields, code and secret. So if I go and check the logic from the example here, what we do is we're retrieving from the users collection uh, uh, the records which are equal to code and secret provided in the headers, and if they match, we return them in the user property. If not, we return null. So we will be using similar strategy, but we'll be using Clerk SDK to authenticate. So let me for now minimize this, not comment out for now. And to do that, we need to save the Clerk user ID as a start, because let me show you in the Clerk documentation what we're going to use. So in the docs, we have in the Next.js section, we have uproot references, Auth method. So this Auth helper will be returning Auth object, which we can use, and it has a property user ID. Basically, we're going to save the user ID in the user's collection and retrieve it when the user is authenticated. So let's define the user ID field here. Let's call it Clerk user ID. It is of type text. It is also, let's add a label so we can browse it in the dashboard as well. So it will be Clerk user ID. And after that, it is indexed as well and unique. Let's make it also required. This is the definition of Clerk user ID, and the next bit is to define the strategy. I'm going to create the strategy in collections. Let's make a folder called lib library, then Auth, and let's call it Clerk strategy or something like this. I will define the strategy here and we'll go through the code in a bit. Here's the Clerk strategy code. Let me minimize it and explore. It contains those three parts. We have Clerk Auth strategy, which we'll be using in the user's collection, and this strategy is defined as an object with the name and then the function authenticate. This is the same as in payload documentation, the name and the authenticate function. So let's go and see the authenticate function. The authenticate function is using getUser function, which we'll explore in a bit, but the idea is that it actually returns the user object, which represents the current logged in user, and if it is null, this means that the authentication failed, which means that we will be returning user null. Otherwise, we'll return the current logged in user. So let's go and see the getUser function. It starts with calling await auth, and this is coming from Clerk. So if I go and navigate to the Next.js documentation of Clerk, if you remember, it returns the auth object, and this auth object is returning the user ID if the user is logged in. So here we're extracting the user ID and checking if it's not logged in, we just return null, and then this results in user being null. After that, what we have is when the user is actually logged in, we're checking if the user exists in the user's collection by using Clerk user ID with equals operation. Then this query, when this query returns 0 results, this means that the user is actually a new user. Basically, we need to create it, and that's why we're executing another payload query using payload SDK to insert the user into the collection. On the other hand, if the find user query actually returns an existing user, we just assign it and return it. This is how the clerk strategy works. So let me go and insert that into the users collection. So we need to replace the example strategy here with our one. So I'm going to remove this object and import the clerk auth strategy. Let's import it actually using local path. So I'm going to do .lib auth clerk strategy. Okay. And as you can see, we now present with a unique constraint failed error. So this is for the clerk user ID. To fix that, we need to go back to the users collection and remove the constraint temporary. And let's refresh by clicking on the terminal again. And as we can see, the admin is now refreshed and it is working fine. Let's go back to the web storm and let's go to the clerk strategy. And we can see the clerk user ID is not recognized as a payload type. So usually payload automatically refreshes and generates the payload types definitions for TypeScript when the fields are modified, but this is not the case currently. So let's do and execute the command manually. Payload provides this command. So let's go back to the Payload CMS documentation, and in TypeScript section we have generating types. As you can see, we can generate the types manually. So I'm going to copy this command and create a new script. Going back to here, and let's call it payload. Actually, I'm going to reuse this one, generate types, and we will call npx to use the current payload version installed locally for the project and execute the command. So let's go back and create a new terminal session and let's try to run it. Payload generate types. As we can see, we're present with an error. I was unable to find a solution for this to resolve this error, so I'm going to modify the payload types manually. So to do that, let's go and copy the field name, which is clerk user ID, and let's go to the payload types. And as you can see, this is the user interface, and it has ID, updated it, created it. Those are the defaults, and we want to drop the rest and to use only clerk user ID. So I'm going to, because the clerk user ID is of type text, I'm going to reuse the email definition and drop the rest. Okay. The next ones are okay. The TypeScript error is resolved now. The type is recognized, and let's close this terminal. Let's go back to the website, to the admin panel, and there are no errors for now. That's great. And let's enable the unique constraint again. So enabling the unique constraint, everything is executed. Let's refresh, double checking. Okay, that was it as an integration and change for the users collection. So let's commit these changes. Okay, I'm going to call it authentication. as a feature, and we can say change users collection, and then to work with a custom type strategy. And let's review our changes. As you can see, import map is modified. This is because payload generate types was executed. So I'm going to leave that for now. Then there is a clerk strategy which we implemented. We already saw the changes because it's a new file, and the changes from the users collection are actually those. So we have Auth property changed from true to our custom strategy, and then we have the payload types regenerated, actually edited manually, and then we added the payload generate type script. So let's commit these changes. Let's continue with the integration. Now I'm in the payload admin dashboard, and I'm going to inspect the network to record the network calls. And let's try to click the logout button. As you can see, I was redirected to logout page and then redirected back to admin. What is going on here? So let's see. I was redirected to sign out page, and then the sign out page actually redirected me to the login page, and then the login page redirected me back to the admin. So this behavior is wrong because we need to fix our clerk integration by using the clerk sign out, not the default payload one. So let's go to clerk documentation and search for custom sign out flow. As you can see, they're providing documentation how to do that with the custom component, and we can use clerk hook and then call sign out. The sign out should handle the redirects as well. So let's use this component example, and to be able to customize this button here, we need to customize actually the payload components. So if we go and check the documentation in payload, so it is in payload custom components, defining a custom component, and conveniently, as you can see, the example is actually telling us how to customize this logout button. So we need to modify the admin section of the config component and reference it where the component is located exactly. So let's start by creating this component. I'm going back to the project, and let's create components directory here. Then maybe let's create payload to be able to distinguish those components from the website ones. And then let's think how to store those components. If I go to the payload GitHub repository, let's check how they store it. They have packages and UI. So this is the subproject of the UI components, and they have these folders here. So assets, elements, forms, etc. views. So if I navigate to elements and search for logout, as you can see, there is a logout element here, and this logout element is using logout icon. This is the exact button which is used, so I'm going to call the subfolder elements. And let's create the logout component. I'm going to call it logout button. And let's implement it. First thing, let's actually copy the example from the clerk. So I'm going to copy that, and let's change it a bit. So I'm going to call this export const logout button, as the name suggests. And then what we're going to do is this is actually a React functional component. Okay. Then the next thing is we are using the sign out from clerk, and let's maybe copy the icon. If we go back to the GitHub, we have the icon. So this icon is coming from the UI icons logout. So I'm going to handle this by creating a maybe new link. And then this link by default, let's navigate to the root, but then we will intercept this action. So this is a standard Next.js link, and then we will have on-click event, on-click handler. And then I'll implement this in a bit. We'll use this logout icon. Let's import this one from Payload CMS logout. And then let's implement this handler, const handle. Okay. Then we need to synchronously call this sign out. So it will be await sign out. And basically we need to supply a redirect URL as well. Let's format the code and let's check out. Handle on click. Okay. So, and then because this is await, we need to make this asynchronous. And now our component should be ready. And then we need to tell payload to use it and or to override basically the component. Sorry for clicking here. Basically, we need to override this component, the default one, with the custom one. And to do that, we need to say to payload which components should be overridden. We can go back to the clerk documentation. And as you can see, we can navigate to admin. So we already have admin section, components. So let's create components here. And then the next one is logout. Then we have button. Let's supply the path to the button. And let's start with components. Then it will be payload, elements, then the logout. So I'm just going to copy that, too many mistakes while type. And then what we can do is to reference the exact export. So this will be logout button. Okay, now let's see the results. The admin is refreshed, and as you can see, there are some import map generations in progress. This means that we should see the difference here. Import map was generated by referencing our new component. So let's see the results. Going back to the localhost, and we can see the error: use clerk can only be used within the clerk provider. This is because if we go back, we're using the hook, but this needs to be used inside the clerk provider. If we go to the payload documentation again, and if we go to the custom components which were currently, there is a root components, and then there is a custom providers. So to be able to customize the providers, we need to also reference the providers which payload needs to use. So as you can see, we need to add providers section in the config. So we are in here. Let's do providers. And then this is an array of providers to use. And let's try and import the provider mentioned in the error message. So we need clerk provider and try to import that. And as you can see, we cannot import this directly because it's not assignable to this type. So what I'm going to do is actually create a standard wrapper around the providers. So let's create it in here. Let's call it providers. And then inside providers, let's create Auth provider, because later we can change this to any other authentication provider and not to clash with the clerk provider as a name. So let's start by defining the provider. So let's export const Auth provider. So this will be as defined in here. Then let's define the children, which will be maybe children, but this one will be React node. Then what we need to do is to return clerk provider and then use the children, basically to wrap the children in clerk provider. So let's double check. We have export const Auth provider, which is of this type, and then the parameters children, and then what we need to do is actually make it client side. And maybe let's import React and let's format the code. Okay, now let's try to replace the clerk provider with our custom one. To be able to do that, let's actually define this as a string. So it will be in components, providers. Then we have Auth provider. Here, and then we can reference the actual const from Auth provider, which is this one. Okay, let's check the results. So the import map should be refreshed in a bit automatically by payload. So let's see here. Okay, generating import map, writing. Okay, and then let's check the results of import map. So we have the logout button and the Auth provider generated by payload. So let's go back, and it is already refreshed, so that's great. Let's go back here and actually drop this definition to fix this. Okay, the admin works, compiles, I mean. So let's see if the sign out button works. So I'm going to click this one. And as you can see, we're signed out and redirected back to the home page. Let's try to navigate to admin. And we're present with the login screen. So this works fine now. Let's log in again. And navigate to admin. So we fixed the logout button, but we have the same problem with admin logout page. So if I navigate to admin logout, as you can see, we were redirected to login, and login redirected us back to admin, which authenticated us because we were not just destroying the session via the sign out button. We need to use the clerk hook to call the sign out again, and to do that we need to call it in the admin logout page. So let's override the admin logout page and inject this functionality. To do that, let's go to the payload documentation quickly to see how to override views or pages. So we have admin, customizing views. Inside here we have root views, and then we can create a brand new view, which we will be doing later. But then we need to override the existing logout page. And ideally it should look like the same as logging out from the Payload CMS. So in the documentation there is an example which is using default template. This is a wrapper around the a page wrapper, let's say, which we can use, but then this default template actually overrides only this part internal, but we need the whole page. There is a minimal template wrapper which we can use to do that. So let's start by creating inside the payload group admin the logout page. This is an exception where we are modifying the payload folder, but we ideally should not do that. So let's create logout and then page tsx. I'm going to implement this quickly. So let's try to use the minimal template first, which we need to import from Next templates, and then let's quickly test that. Again, this is a use client page because we need use clerk hook. So let's try to navigate to admin logout. And as you can see, this looks like a payload UI, but it's not very recognizable for now. So let's try and search in payload GitHub for the logout page and try to copy the UI from there. So if I try to by text maybe logging out, let's see what we have is there is a translation string which is used. So I'm going to copy the translation string logging out and see where it is actually used. Okay. And there is a logout client. Ideally, you will clone the repo and explore a bit more, but I'm a bit lucky here. And probably this is what I need. There is a logout client component. And first of all, what we need to do is use the same translations provided by Payload so that this logout page is translated as well. So I'm going to copy the use translation bit from here, insert that, Then let's see, we don't need the router. The handle logout, we will be handling the logout using Clerk, so we will create use effect for Clerk bit, so we don't need that. And we just need the UI. So I'm going to copy this one and paste it inside the minimal template. Also, let me wrap this in parentheses. And then let's import this. Let's format the code. And let's see, authentication logging out is used as a string. And let's go back to the page. Okay, looks like this is Payload CMS UI, which is great. Let me quickly test that here. Awesome. So let me roll back this one. Now the UI is ready. Let's try to call the sign out from Clerk. To do that, let's create a use effect. So I'm here in the component and let's create the use effect function. And let's copy the calls from the logout button. Then we need to import use Clerk, format the code a bit. Okay, let's import this one. And then we need to make this async. So I'm going to create a function which calls the await. Then what we're going to do is self-invoke it. And then let's make this function async. Okay, so this way we're calling the sign out when the page is loaded. So let's go and test this. Let me refresh the application. Let's sign in. Let's navigate to admin. And it is compiling. Okay, it is compiled. Then let's try to navigate to logout. So let's check the error. Okay, we have failed to fetch error. So in case we are receiving any errors, it is better to redirect the user to the root page as we did with the button. But to do that, we need to use window location href, then navigate to the root page. As you can see, I was redirected and then the sign in button appeared. So this works okay now. So let's commit this code and so it will be feature authentication. And then what we did is we implemented the logout button. So I'll say add logout button, and we also added logout page. Let's call it admin logout page and the Auth provider. Let's commit this one. That's it for this part. Now let's continue with role-based access control using Clerk. We will be using users' metadata to save the roles, and we will have several roles. The first one is super admin role, which will have full access, including users role updates. This is basically the user management. And the admin role, which will have full access to collections, create, read, update, delete, but it will not have user management access. The same goes for the editor role, which will not have user management access, but it will have create and read access to collections, to all of the records, but then it will have self-update and self-delete access to collections only for the records which are created by the user only. Let's start implementing role-based access control by following the documentation. I'm navigating to the Clerk docs. Inside SDK references, we have Next.js, and there is a role-based access control article. In this article, they describe how to implement it using users' metadata. There is another way using organizations and permissions, but this is out of the scope. So the first step is to configure the session token. We need to choose which category to use for the user's metadata. So there is an article for that as well. And what we need to do is to read the roles array on the front end. And then what we need to do is also write and write basically on the backend. That is why we will choose the public category. The rest, the unsafe one, we will not choose because the front end has an access to write as well, and then we will not be able to read the roles if we choose private. That's why we will go with public. This is very well described in this article as well. And the first step is to configure the sessions. Basically, let's navigate to sessions. And there is a customized session token. So I'm going to edit that. And we need to set from where the public metadata will be extracted and exposed as a property. So I'm going to copy this JSON and paste it here. Basically, there will be metadata in the sessions, which is exposing users' public metadata from basically the user. And this is in here as well, visible. So I'm going to save that. The next step is to define the global TypeScript definitions and set up the roles, basically the list of roles, so that it is recognized in our code compile time, and we have autocomplete for them as well. So let's jump to the code. I already implemented that, the whole role-based access control feature, and we will go through it one by one. So the types and global definitions are in types, global definition TS file, and as you can see, we declared the same interface, but the difference is that I'm going to use multiple roles instead of one as in the example, and basically the user can belong to multiple roles. That's why we define metadata with roles array, and the actual roles are defined in constants. So if we navigate in constants folder Auth, those are the roles which we described. Super admin will have basically full access and also access for assigning roles to users. Admin basically will have CRUD access, create, read, update, delete, and editor basically will have create and update and delete access only for the records which the editor created, and the read access will be the full one. Also create, basically anyone can create. So these roles will be described in access of the collections, but we will go into that later. The next step is to set up the admin role for the first user which we're using. I already registered several of them, so let's go to users. And as you can see, this is the first user which we're using through the video, but I also created superadmin1, admin1, and editor1 users so that we can assign the corresponding roles using the user1, basically the root user. So to do that, we need to manually set the superadmin role to the first user, which was user1, login, and then use basically the dashboard to assign the roles to the rest of the users. So to do that, we need to go to the metadata, public, and edit that. As described in the article, they're setting the role admin, but we need roles admin. So roles superadmin, apologies, superadmin. And basically this needs to be the same as in here. Superadmin, save that. Okay, and then the next thing is to create a reusable function for checking the roles. As you can see in the example here, what we do is we're extracting the session claims, basically to get the metadata object and check for the role. If the role which is passed in the parameters is equal to the role which is assigned to the user, because session claims is basically the user's session. So let's go and see this in here. I implemented it in lib folder auth utils, and again I'm supporting the an array of roles, and here what we do is the same thing. We get the session, we check if the roles exist at all. If not, we return false, because by default there are no roles assigned to the newly registered users. And what we do here is we check the roles, for example, if the user has the role, let's say, admin only, and then if we check like this, check role, then we'll have various roles to check if the user belongs to them, super admin or admin. This will return true for the user which belongs to admin, because some of the roles are matched with the user's one. So basically that's how this function works. Then the next step is to create the admin dashboard in the article. The admin dashboard is actually our Payload CMS instance, so this is done. Then we need to protect the payload. We already did that behind the authentication using middleware. There are two ways described here. Either we use the middleware or we use page level role check using the function from here. We will be using both, so let me show you how. So basically they are describing how to implement this middleware. You can check here. What we do is we check if it is admin root. Then when it is admin root, they're checking if it's role. If the user doesn't have the admin role, it is redirected to the root page. What we do in our middleware, if you remember, it is in here. We basically extract the user ID from the Auth using Clerk SDK. In this if here, when the user is not authenticated and when it is protected root, we will redirect to the sign-in page or to the login. And by authenticated root, we mean not only payload roots, but any other roots in the website which requires authentication, like the profile, which let me show you, which is this page. We extract the user, and actually this if will not be executed at all, and we will not reach this page because the middleware will intercept it. But then we just display the first name for the authenticated users. That's why we have an example of authenticated page. It can be a shopping cart or any other page which requires authentication. So this is how the middleware works, and the important bit is that Clerk is responsible for authentication only here, and then we extract the roles from Clerk's user session, and then the authorization part is done by Payload CMS using access to the collections, which we'll see basically in here. I have created various checks. For example, is admin enabled roles, which is checking for super admin, admin, and editor. The admin member roles are the roles basically within access to the Payload CMS or admin dashboard. And this way we're handling the authorization by using the access property of the collections. We'll go into that in more detail in a bit. So let's go and navigate to the next pages. So we can do page level access as well using the check role function, and what we do here is this is handled again. The middleware is responsible for making sure that the user is authenticated, and then what we can do is do various checks, for example on my route, which is shipped with the default Payload CMS installation. We can check for the role superadmin. Basically, this is get endpoint, which is exposing users collection. But for the users collection, only superadmins can access and basically have to read access to them. We'll go into that in more detail in a bit. And the seventh step is describing how to create an action which is handling role updates. We're using form data. We have that in a different form because we have these multiple roles. We will not be able to basically remove all of the roles, but we can basically change the roles for the user. You can re-implement it in any way you want. And then there is a search users page, which we will call clerk users. And then basically they're adding the actual page for searching of the users, importing the component, and then displaying the users. We'll have similar. And then basically that's the whole implementation. So let's go and jump to this search users functionality, and I will show you basically how this is implemented. So it is inside the components views, and this is basically referenced in the components views, and I have created custom view, clerk user view. Let me quickly show you how this works. So let me navigate to localhost and to log in with our root user, which has superadmin rights. So why? Because when we navigate basically to the view, and this is the path of the clerk users, I'm doing a check. If it's not admin, then the access is denied by redirecting to the root. So let me log in and navigate to admin. And while this is compiling, the clerk users page, the custom view, you can create like this, but then we need to reference it as well. So to reference the custom view, we need to add after nav links as well, which you will see here. The after nav links is basically we can add various components here, and I have created the after nav link, which is located in elements after nav links, because they can be multiple components here. And then there is a clerk users link. What I'm doing is I'm also basically checking the superadmin access, and then what we do is we display the users link if the user is superadmin. Then if I navigate to the page, as you can see, we're present with the view, which is basically this view here, which is configured in the clerk's users view, the component. And then this component is checking again the superadmin access. After that, going back to the view, we create a client, and then we are using a get users list, and then we are querying from querying the users list with the search parameter coming from the URLs, which you can put anything here. It can be clerk's user ID, email, name, etc. And then the default template, we already saw how to override the views. We use the gutter so that this is staying like in a container. The gutter is coming from the Payload CMS. We have h1 and then the search users component, which is basically a simple text input, which is coming again from the Payload CMS, which has a label and on change. And whenever we type, we basically redirect to the path with the search parameter. So if I type here my name, as you can see, all of the users are found, because in users here, I have created with my name plus the role to assign. So that's why how this is working. And then when all of the users are found, we iterate through them. We assign the key as a user ID. We display first name and last name as a start. And then because I don't have first name and last name, we use the email addresses and display them. So if I have multiple email addresses assigned, but I don't have first name and last name assigned to the account here. Then what we do is we display the update role form, which you can see in here, and we can check multiple checkboxes. So how it works is, let's do the superadmin one assignment. So I'm checking here. Let me refresh. I think something happened. So let me write that. Okay. So I'm assigning superadmin role and to the superadmin one user, and basically this will trigger a action for basically action which will update the role, and we're inside the action. What we do is we're receiving the form data and the user ID to update, but we also check for the superadmin access again in case the action is invoked directly. We also check for, we create some validations here using Zot. As an object, we need to have at least one role set, and then it needs to be a string of arrays. We parse that, and when there is basically when there are errors, we display them, return them. And then when there are no errors, what we do is we create a Clerk client. We go and update for the user with the user ID. We set the public metadata, the roles which are coming from the form, and then we revalidate the path so that we display up-to-date UI, and then we return the data so that we can display the up-to-date data. So I'm going to update this one, and as you can see, it is updated successfully. This is because we returned this payload here, which is basically the UI here. Iterates through the roles defined in constants. If you remember, it is in constant here. And then we display the checkboxes for the various roles and check if the roles which are coming basically from the user are belongs to the defined in the constants. Basically, if the user is assigned to the role, we check the checkbox, and then we have some state for the displaying the errors, and basically the button for update. So that's it for this page. Let's see how the authorization works. So let me navigate to the users. Posts. For example, I created a post as well. Let me maybe open the users collection and show you the configuration. So this is the users collection, and everything is standard here, the Slack, and what we did is the authentication bit before, and we're using only one field clerk user ID. And let's go and see first the admin hidden property. Why we set this is because we don't want to display the collection here, because it's not very useful. So if I make it false here, it will appear, and we can browse basically all of the registered users, but only clerk user ID is visible. And that's why we will use basically clerk's dashboard to browse it, but you can obviously override the views and make your own. That's why this is not very useful. I'm going to disable that. And as you can see, the page was refreshed, so we don't have any access to the user collection now. And the actual access for creating, create, update, delete, etc. is managed by these functions which I created. And for the create, it is forbidden, basically just a simple wrapper. We cannot create users manually because the creation is done by the basically the strategy which we discussed earlier. And clerk auth strategy, how it works is basically it is returning the authenticated user. But first, what we are doing is we're checking if the user is authenticated. Then we try to find the user in users collection. When it is not found, we create the user. So this is how we create the new records and assign the clerk user ID with the user ID of clerk. If not, we return the user when it is found. So that is why the create is forbidden, the manual one. We need to read the user's collection, so it is allowed, so that the various bits referencing the users in Payload CMS work. Basically what we have here is the posts. I'll just quickly show you. So the posts is basically referencing the created by the user collection. So we need to know who created the post. That's why we need the read access. And then what we have here is the update, delete, and unlock and read versions together with create. They are forbidden, with the same reason that we don't need to update the clerk user ID. It is done automatically for creation, and it should not be updated or deleted. So what we have here is the admin access. This is the access for to manage the users, basically to say who can access the admin dashboard. That's why it is admin enabled roles. The admin enabled roles are basically all of the roles which I defined, because editor is also part of the administration of the website. And for the regular users, I'm just using the is authenticated access. So let me quickly jump to the function definitions. So there is authenticated access, and basically it is checking just if the user is set. Basically that's it for the users collection. And as you can see, I have defined the access functions here, and there are more than defined here. Why? Because we have also posts collection. It's a bit different. Just an example how we can create a post collection with and then when we create a new post, we have references. Basically, this is the user ID, which we can find in Clerk. That should be my logged in user. And then basically when we create a post, everyone can create a post, basically super admin or editor admin enabled roles. But then anonymous users needs to read the post basically from the website. That is why we have created status equals to published. What we have here is the drafts, and only published posts can be read by the users. Apologies. But then the drafts and basically the whole collection can be read by admin enabled roles. So going to the next bits, update, delete it can be either super admin or admin, or if it's editor, basically when it is authenticated, then we check if created by property is equal to the user ID. What I'm saying here is that only editors can basically update their own posts and delete them, and they can create posts, but admins can delete and update all of them. Read versions is the same as create. So basically that's the whole logic here. And what we have here is we create by relationship to the users. And the important bit is that access for updating is disabled, because we don't want to change the relationship of the users. And where it is located on the sidebar, and when basically there is a create by set here. So that's it. And then what we have in media collection is kind of similar. We have create admin enabled roles, read is allowed fully. Then what update and delete is actually only admin roles, only super admin and admin can do that, because once the media is uploaded, it can be referenced in multiple posts. So if someone deletes, the creator deletes the media, it will not be good. So the admins should decide on that. And then for the create, we have only for the read versions, we have is-admin enabled roles, basically. So that's basically the whole philosophy. As a final part, I have added Docker support with Postgres. So the first thing is we have Docker compose YAML file, which is defining Postgres as a service, and it is using Postgres 15 with the default username and password. and the volume defined in the project locally to save the data. We have also health checks defined here. So the volume, the files will be saved in Docker data, and you can delete them if you want to refresh your database. This corresponds to Payload Clerk example.db for SQLite. But for the Postgres, we're using the volumes in the file system. So this volume needs to be git ignored as well. So I have added git ignore here section in the Docker app to ignore all of the Postgres data. And then the next things is that I have added dependencies. The dependencies are the Payload CMS DB Postgres, and this is described in the payload documentation as well. So basically, the current example can work with SQLite and Postgres with a few code changes. Let me show you how to switch to Postgres. And I also fixed few bits. For example, the generate import map was reformatted each time with prettier, so I have added prettier ignore for that, and few other bits. Let me show you the changes. So first thing is the git keep for the Docker directory. So it is versioned, and we have the import map regenerated, which I noticed, and then I added prettier ignore for that. Then the users collection, as before mentioned, the unique constraint failure, I have commented unique true by default, but you need to enable it once you migrate the database and once you have the first user, for example, locally. In case you're receiving unique constraint error, just you need to comment this out, which is already commented out, and you need to roll back once you're ready with your application. Then the next thing is a bit of fixes here on the Clerk user link, which is not related to Docker, but I just noticed this one was failing when we log out, so just a small fix. And then in config, what we have is, let me show you actually in the file. First thing, we have SQLite adapter as a start, which we were using through the whole video, and Postgres adapter commented out. So you have two sections here for the SQLite, which is used by default, and for the Postgres. So if we want to switch to Postgres, first thing is actually, let's go and run the Docker. I'm going to a second terminal, and I'm going to say I'm going to the second terminal, and I'm going to say Docker compose app, and now Postgres is pulling and starting the Docker image. Okay, then the next thing is, let's switch. As you can see now, the files should be created here in Postgres. They're created and git ignored. Then in payload config, we need to comment out SQLite or just delete it, and then enable the Postgres section, the definition. Then we need to enable the comment out SQLite adapter and enable the Postgres adapter. So this is the payload config changes. The next changes are actually from the env example. I have modified it a bit, so you can use either database URI for the SQLite version as an example here, or the Postgres. So I'm going to copy the database URI for the Postgres and navigating to env local and replacing the SQLite version with the Postgres one as a connection string. Then Basically, this should work with Postgres now. Let's test. Okay, running locally. And let's try to log in. Let's navigate to admin. It is compiling. Compiled. Okay, so to check actually the instance, you can browse the database, but I know that I don't have any posts created. So that's a brand new database working with Postgres. Basically, that was it with the payload integration with Clerk, and thank you very much for your time. Hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks.